Hello and welcome to Mount Cynicism. You're here with me, Coach Ant and Coach Tom.
Right.
And today we're going to do a video on how to run without getting knackered.
Right, zoom in. Make sure that we look like we're going up a huge hill. Got a shot? Yeah, cool.
Guys, I can't quite get the angle. Oh, forget it. Roll to montage.
Hello and welcome to this video all about how to run without getting absolutely knackered. We know that running is really tough for the body, way harder than swimming and cycling can be. We've got a lot more forces running down through our joints and our muscles. So today we're going to cover some top tips on how to avoid getting knackered when you're running. So we know that hydration is super important, not just for sport but for day-to-day life as well. In an ideal scenario, we want to be aiming for around 1.2, maybe up to 2 litres of water before we even get onto the subject of exercise. So before you go out for a run, you need to make sure that you're really well hydrated. You can get away with just plain water, but for me, I like to make sure that I've got an electrolyte in my water bottle as well. It just helps me preload and get a few more electrolytes in me because I'm a particularly heavy sweater. But there's plenty of websites where you can go and check out what you need to take on board before you go for a run. So your hydration can be made up of anything liquidy, so it can be water, it can be your electrolyte, it can even be tea or coffee. But you need to bear in mind those caffeine lovers out there, and I put myself in that category, you just need to be aware that caffeine will lead you to want to urinate, maybe even during your session, so you might even need to have to sneak out and find a bush somewhere. Nutrition is another really important aspect. What you eat the day before or even the night before you go out for your run is going to have a massive impact on how you perform in that run you're going to be doing. So I've been there before where I've had, maybe a curry or a pizza the night before, and I've gone out for that run or that race the day afterwards and my stomach has not been with me for that run. So you need to bear in mind that eating a good healthy diet is going to help you perform that day after, and almost taking that view that your food is your fuel, so whatever you put in your body is going to be there to provide you the energy for that run coming up. So what we do outside of running is also really important. So cross training is a real big subject, so it can be strength and conditioning, yoga, mobility, stretching, all this kind of stuff can help our running performance. And probably one of the most vital parts is the moments before you step out the door, so your warm-up. It's very hard to maybe go from your seated position at the desk straight into the running motion. So what I like to prescribe is a quick 10-minute routine just to get you mobilised, get your muscles switched on and almost get your head in the zone for what you're about to do. We've got a good 10-minute warm-up routine coming up very soon. So we're not here to teach you about sucking eggs, but breathing is highly valuable for running and for life, strangely enough. When we are running, obviously our muscles need oxygen in order to carry our bodies, so be very aware of how you're breathing whilst you're running. And it could be the fact that your breathing is becoming a little bit shorter. We've all been there maybe at the end of a race where our breathing becomes really short and really shallow. And what we want to try and do is relax a little bit more, take deeper breaths, make sure our body's getting a full lungful of oxygen each time. So hydration, I know we've spoken about this subject already and we're not running out of topics to talk about, I can promise you, but hydration during your activity is really important to make sure that we're keeping our hydration levels up. Loads and loads of studies have shown that once you become even the slightest bit dehydrated, it will start to affect your performance. So you can obviously carry water around with you. You can carry like a handheld water bottle. You can wear a long distance or an ultra running vest with your water bottles attached to you as well. There are many options to do it, but we highly recommend that you obviously drink water during your activity. For longer or more intense efforts, you might find that fueling during your run is highly beneficial. Most gels or bars on the market will give you maybe around 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrate per serving. For maybe a more intense effort or a race, you want to try and make sure you're aiming for around 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So that means you might be taking on maybe a couple, up to maybe 3 gels an hour. But this is something you want to sort of take away and experiment with. Some people are fine eating a lot of gels within an hour session or within a longer session. Some people really can't digest that amount. So it's worth just getting a selection of items, trying them out on a training session and seeing how they work for you, and then coming up with your own kind of nutrition plan based on your own experiments. One of the biggest stumbling blocks a lot of runners find when they're running is actually pacing themselves, and that's often one of the reasons why we hit that wall quite early on in a run. When we first start out running, it might feel like we only have 2 paces, either walking or running. But as we become more and more conditioned, we find that we have a range of gears that we can perhaps switch into, and that's where a lot of like the zoning system tends to come from. It gives us a numerical system in order to base our paces off. A simple way of doing it is something called RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, and in a simple format it's basically a scale of 1 to 10, and you would pick a number on that scale as to how hard that effort feels at that moment in time. If you're going out for an easy run or that kind of zone 2 run, you probably want to be about 4 on that scale, and as you go up through the ranges you might find that like a 9 or a 10 is an all-out sprint and obviously unsustainable for a long period of time. Once we've gone from RPE, if we want to maybe get a little bit more technological behind it, we can then start looking at heart rate zones or even pacing zones. Our preference for easy runs is to use heart rate, and a super simple way to estimate your zones is as follows. You're just going to need to run hard for 30 minutes and then use the last 20 minutes as an estimate of your lactate threshold heart rate. You need to run throughout the 30 minutes and you need to be obviously injury free, because this is not an easy session. You can then use 85 to 89% of this number as your zone 2 heart rate. You can do the same test to work out your pace too, but this time you'll use the whole 30 minutes as your average pace. For zone 2 you'll use 114 to 129% of this pace. Top tip, it's best to convert your minute per mile or minute per kilometre pace to seconds before working out your zone 2. Another factor to look into is your running form, or like how you actually run. And it's not something that a lot of people tend to think about in too much detail, but it is highly, highly important when we're out running. One of the first things to start thinking about is your foot strike, and there is a very long avenue we can go down when it comes to foot strike as to whether we're a toe striker or a heel striker or a mid or forefoot striker. Essentially what we want to think about is, where are our feet landing? That's the most important thing for me. Are our feet landing underneath our hips? Are we landing in the most efficient way possible, and we're not applying those brakes by having your foot landing ahead of your centre of gravity? We'll then go on to something like cadence. So cadence is again unique to everybody. It's quite often it's depicted by your height. So taller runners out there, you might find that actually your a good cadence is around 165 to 170 steps per minute. Whereas if you're a shorter runner, you might find that actually 180 to 190 is an efficient foot strike. But if you're around that kind of range of about 175 to 185, you're pretty much on a good course for your cadence. Posture, again, we want to start thinking about, you know, how we're holding ourselves. So are we sitting up nice and tall? Are we pulling our shoulders back? Are we maintaining that sort of nice tall posture with our head held upright and not slouching down and becoming sort of inefficient by slouching down into our running? And the final point with our running form is our arms. So what are our arms doing when we're running? They're really important to help us maintain our cadence. Generally, the quicker that our arms go, our legs are going to follow that exact same pattern. We want to make sure that our arms are tracking forwards and backwards and they're not starting to come across our central line. What we tend to find is once that arm comes across that central line, it's going to bring your shoulder with it, and obviously we're going to get a lot of movement in our upper torso, which we don't want. We want to try and maintain a nice strong running form with those arms swinging forwards and backwards. So at the end of your current run, we want to set you up optimally for that next run you've got coming up. So we're going to start with bringing that pace down a little bit, so making sure that our heart rate's gradually coming down towards the end of that session, so that we're not ending on like a real high or a real sprint or anything like that. Once we've brought that pace down and we've finished that run, we'll then move on to something to make sure that we're recovering as quickly as possible. Now, stretching is an interesting field. A lot of people love it and a lot of people have been doing it for years. What we've generally found now is that there's not a lot of evidence to support its benefits with runners. So what we highly recommend is that we move into something more like yoga or mobility. That tends to help runners a lot better. So rest is probably one of the most important factors, and it's a subject that sounds a lot easier than it really is. So rest covers everything from, you know, your training plan, making sure you've got recovery days in your plan, maybe even recovery weeks or slight step back weeks where you sort of ease back a little bit on your mileage. It also comes under whether you're getting enough sleep, whether your nutrition, your hydration again is on point, making sure that once we've stepped in from that run that we are, you know, fueling ourselves correctly, making sure we're getting enough hydration and water on board to make sure we're helping our recovery, and also making sure that we're doing enough training to challenge our body, but making sure that we're not doing too much and falling into that trap of overtraining. Thanks for watching!
Like and subscribe!